Jamie never thought life would lead them here standing amidst the cold, empty aisles of a Walmart store at midnight. With a degree in graphic design in hand, Jamie once dreamed of a creative job at a stylish startup, or at the very least, continuing on to graduate school. But life never goes as planned. When Jamie's mother fell gravely ill, the mounting medical bills loomed like relentless waves, and the dream of a bright future was quickly replaced by a pressing reality: the need for a stable job with health insurance. Walmart, with its night shifts and meager overtime pay, became the only lifeline. The Walmart store where Jamie worked was located on the outskirts of West Brancha, small isolated town, seemingly forgotten by time. The road leading to the store cut through a shadowy forest, where the sparse streetlights barely illuminated the dense black silhouettes of trees, creating the feeling of being surrounded by an endless curtain. Even during the day, the area carried an otherworldly aura, strange silence, as if nature itself held its breath. But at night, as Jamie entered the store, the air grew heavier and colder, as if the building itself exhaled a chilling breath from another world. From the very first interview, Jamie sensed something was off. Brenda, the HR staff member, spoke in a monotone, almost mechanical voice as she handed over a stack of documents and asked Jamie to sign them. But what stood out most was a separate sheet of paper, devoid of any Walmart logo, printed in a plain font and containing 5 peculiar rules. Brenda didn't offer much explanation, only emphasizing that they were non-negotiable and that failure to comply would result in immediate termination. The stern look in Brenda's eyes kept Jamie from asking further questions, and they simply nodded and signed, despite the uneasiness brewing inside. Those rules echoed in Jamie's mind as they began their first shift. The fluorescent lights shone brightly, but coldly, reflecting off the spotless white tile floor, creating a lifeless atmosphere. The endless rows of shelves, perfectly organized, gave the unsettling impression that they were waiting for something. The store was vast but empty, filled only with the echo of footsteps and the occasional beep of a barcode scanner in the distance. Jamie felt as though they were being watched, even though it was clear no one else was around. Despite the strangeness, Jamie reminded themselves that it was just a necessary job to keep their mother alive. But deep down, Jamie knew something wasn't right. This store wasn't just a store. Those rules weren't meaningless warnings, and the darkness here wasn't just ordinary darkness. It felt like a living entity, always waiting, ready to consume anyone who dared to cross the fragile boundaries it had set. On Jamie's very first day at work, they were required to attend an orientation session specifically for night shift employees. In a small room at the back of the store, where the industrial smell of cleaning products mixed with the warmth of burnt popcorn, Brenda's HR staff member placed a stack of documents on the table. She spoke in a monotone, emotionless voice, as if she had repeated this speech hundreds of times. Jamie listened attentively, but what caught their attention the most was a separate sheet of paper, unlike any of the other documents. The sheet wasn't printed on Walmart letterhead, but was simply a plain white page with 5 rules written in a standard font. Brenda slid it toward Jamie, her eyes serious, almost cautionary. These are additional rules specifically for night shift employees at this store. They are non-negotiable. Violating any of these rules may result in immediate termination. Jamie frowned, picking up the paper and reading through it. 1. The lights will dim at 2:13 a.m. Do not use any light sources, including flashlights or light from your phone. 2. If you hear your name called over the intercom between midnight and 5 a.m., do not respond. If the calling persists, start singing any commercial jingle you remember. 3. The restroom near the sports section is off limits to night shift employees. Only use the restroom at the front of the store. 4. If you encounter a customer exhibiting signs of sleepwalking, do not engage with them. Report the incident to management via Channel 3 on the radio. 5. If you find merchandise arranged in a perfect circle, do not disturb it. Use the radio to report it, with the code, Area Needs Resetting. Jamie read and reread each rule, the unease in their chest growing stronger with every pass. These rules were unlike any workplace guidelines they had ever encountered. They didn't seem related to workplace safety or store management. Instead, they carried an eerie undertone, as if they were meant to conceal something Jamie couldn't yet comprehend. Is this some kind of joke? Jamie asked, trying to find some relief in Brenda's expression. But she didn't smile. Instead, her face grew even more serious. It's not a joke. These rules exist to protect you in the store. Sign here to confirm that you've read and understood them. Jamie felt a cold shiver run down their spine as they put pen to paper. Part of them wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper into the reasons behind these rules. But Brenda's gaze silenced them. She didn't seem like someone who would entertain such questions. Holding the paper in hand, Jamie walked out of the room, feeling as though they had just signed a pact with an invisible entity. These rules weren't just warnings, they carried a tension and mystery. Like pieces of a puzzle Jamie wasn't sure they wanted to solve. But one thing Jamie knew for certain, they would have to follow them, because a vague feeling deep inside told them that the consequences of breaking these rules would be far worse than just losing their job. The first night at Walmart seemed to stretch on endlessly. Jamie walked through the empty aisles, the cold fluorescent lights casting lifeless beams onto the white-tiled floor. The atmosphere in the store was unlike any place Jamie had ever worked. It wasn't just silence, it was a heavy, oppressive silence, as if every hidden corner of the store held a secret Jamie didn't want to uncover. The neatly arranged shelves, unnervingly perfect, gave the impression that they were watching Jamie's every step. Jamie tried to get used to the job, restocking merchandise and checking areas according to the assigned list. But no matter how hard they focused on the tasks, an unsettling feeling clung to them. Occasionally, Jamie heard faint noises coming from the back, distant whispers, soft footsteps, or the clink of metal. But when they turned around, there was nothing but emptiness. Jamie told themselves it was just their imagination, but each time it happened, their heart raced faster, and cold sweat began to beat on their forehead. Around 10 a.m., Jamie glanced at the clock and remembered the first rule Brenda had emphasized. The lights will dim at 2:13 a.m. Do not use any light sources. They didn't understand why, but a sense of unease began to rise within them. Jamie stood in the middle of the aisle, looking up at the ceiling where the fluorescent lights still shone brightly. They wondered if this was just some bizarre prank by the store. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the lights began to change. The fluorescent bulbs didn't go out completely, but they dimmed, casting a weak, sickly yellow glow. The store, already cold and eerie, now felt even more terrifying. Jamie felt as though they were standing in another realm, a place that didn't belong to the world they knew. They held their breath, eyes darting around, trying to spot any signs of something unusual. And then they saw it. At the end of the aisle, where the faint light couldn't reach, a shadowy figure appeared. At first, Jamie thought it was just an ordinary shadow, perhaps a customer or another employee. But as they looked closer, the figure didn't move like a human. It stood still, motionless, as though it was watching them. Jamie felt their heart stop. They wanted to step forward to check, but their legs wouldn't move. A chilling sensation ran down their spine. and they realized they couldn't take their eyes off the figure. Suddenly, the figure began to disappear, not by moving, but as if it was dissolving into the air, merging with the darkness. Jamie stood there, heart pounding, feeling as though they had just escaped something dangerous. They didn't know what it was, but one thing was clear. The first rule wasn't a joke. And this store at night wasn't just a workplace, it was a living entity, harboring things Jamie couldn't yet comprehend. Jamie still couldn't forget the strange figure they had seen on the first night. They tried to reassure themselves that it was just a misunderstanding, a shadow created by the dim light. But every time they thought about it, the cold and uneasy feeling flooded their mind again. The rules that Jamie once thought were odd were now beginning to take on a more frightening meaning. Jamie decided to ask Mickey, a longtime employee at the store, for answers. Mickey was a middle-aged man, small in stature, but with sharp eyes, as if he had seen everything Jamie couldn't even imagine. He had worked the night shift here for nearly 8 years, and according to other employees, Mickey was the only one who truly understood the strange things that happened in the store. Jamie found Mickey stocking shelves in the frozen food section. The chill from the freezers made the conversation feel even more tense. "Mickey, I need to ask you something," Jamie began, trying to keep their voice calm. Mickey didn't look up, continuing his work. "Are the rules Brenda gave me real? I mean, they're not a joke, are they?" Mickey paused, his hand trembling slightly as he placed a pack of meat on the shelf. He turned to look at Jamie, his expression serious. "What have you seen?" Mickey asked, his voice low and cautious. Jamie hesitated, unsure if they should share everything. I saw a figure. Last night, when the lights dimmed, it was standing at the end of the aisle. But then, it disappeared." Mickey sighed, as if he had heard the story many times before. He placed a hand on Jamie's shoulder, gripping it lightly, as if to emphasize every word. "Listen, Jamie. You don't need to know more than what you've been told. Those rules aren't there to make your life harder. They're there to protect you. Don't break them, and don't try to figure out why they exist." Jamie felt uneasy with Mickey's vague answer. "But why? If I don't understand, how can I know what I'm dealing with?" Mickey shook his head, his gaze becoming distant, as if he were recalling something horrifying. "You don't want to know, trust me. I've seen people try to find out. They don't work here anymore. Some disappeared. Some aren't themselves anymore." Jamie felt a chill run down their spine. Mickey's words weren't just a warning, they carried a terrifying truth that Jamie couldn't ignore. "So what is that figure?" Jamie asked, their voice almost a whisper. Mickey glanced around, as if afraid someone or something was eavesdropping. "No one knows for sure, but I can tell you this. It's not human, and if you see it, the best thing you can do is stay away. Don't approach it. Don't try to interact with it, and absolutely don't break any of the rules." Jamie's head spun. They wanted to ask more, to understand better, but Mickey had already turned away, resuming his work. "Just do your job, Jamie, and remember, don't ask too many questions. You'll be fine if you follow the rules." Jamie stood there, feeling as though they had just entered a game without knowing the rules. The mysterious guidelines, the strange figure, and Mickey's warnings, all of it made Jamie realize that this store wasn't just a workplace. It was a place filled with secrets Jamie wasn't sure they wanted to uncover. But one thing Jamie knew for certain. They had to survive the nights ahead. And to do that, they had to follow every rule, no matter how strange they seemed. The third night at Walmart began, just like every other night, cold, isolated, and filled with suspicious silences. Jamie tried to focus on their work, but the unease refused to let them go. The fluorescent lights overhead, their pale white glow, seemed to make everything even stranger. Jamie walked through the aisles, feeling the emptiness and eeriness of the surrounding space. Still, they tried to follow Mickey's advice. Don't ask too many questions, don't dig too deep, and most importantly, follow all the rules. That night, around 1:45 a.m., while Jamie was inspecting a shelf in the toy section, an unexpected sound came from the store's intercom system. At first, they were startled, their heart pounding. The sound wasn't the usual announcement. It was a voice calling their name. "Jamie, report to the service desk immediately." The voice over the intercom was clear, but something was off. It didn't sound like anyone Jamie had ever heard in the store. The voice was dry, emotionless, as though it didn't belong to a human. Jamie froze, trying to recall the second rule Brenda had emphasized. If you hear your name on the intercom, under no circumstances should you respond or move toward the location mentioned. They took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. But then, the voice came again, this time more urgent. "Jamie, report to the service desk immediately. Jamie, do you hear me?" Each time their name was called, the coldness in the air became more pronounced. Jamie felt as though the entire store was watching them, as if something was waiting for their reaction. They tried to ignore it and continued with their work, but the voice didn't stop. It repeated over and over, becoming stranger with each iteration. The tone shifted, from dry to distorted, as though the intercom system was malfunctioning. Jamie, come here, immediately." The voice stretched out, echoing through the aisles, making Jamie feel as though it was surrounding them. This time, they didn't just hear the voice, they could feel a presence. Something unseen, but undeniably close. Jamie stepped back, their eyes darting around, trying to spot any sign of something unusual. But the store remained as empty as ever. There was no one at the service desk, no one in the aisles. It was just them and the voice on the intercom. Jamie remembered Mickey's warning. Don't break the rules. Don't respond. Don't react. They clenched their fists, trying to control their increasingly rapid breathing. The voice on the intercom continued, but this time, it stopped calling their name. It began whispering, producing unintelligible sounds, as though speaking in a foreign language. Jamie felt their heads spinning, as if the sounds were invading their mind. They closed their eyes, trying to stop themselves from panicking. They knew that if they reacted, if they moved toward the service desk, something horrifying would happen. But they didn't know what, and they didn't want to find out. After a few minutes, the voice on the intercom suddenly went silent. The space became so quiet that Jamie could hear their own heartbeat pounding in their chest. They opened their eyes, looking around, but nothing had changed. The store was still cold, isolated, and unnervingly eerie. Jamie knew they had just passed a test of situation they couldn't explain. But they also knew that the nights ahead would only grow more terrifying, and to survive, they would have to follow every rule, no matter how strange or irrational they seemed. Jamie couldn't stop thinking about the strange events that had occurred in the store. The mysterious rules, the distorted voice on the intercom, and the shadow they had seen on the first night of it felt like pieces of a horrifying game they didn't know how to play. Jamie decided they needed to find out more. Something wasn't right about this place, and Jamie felt that without knowing the truth, they wouldn't be able to keep working there. On their first day off after a shift, Jamie sat in front of their computer and began searching for information about the Walmart store where they worked. At first, nothing unusual came up, just the usual reviews about services and products. But when Jamie started digging deeper, Using keywords related to the area's history, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. The land on which the store was built once had a different name, the Hollow Grounds. This name appeared in many old documents, folklore, and even official reports. According to what Jamie read, the Hollow Grounds was an area known for strange phenomena. Local residents often spoke of mysterious disappearances, unexplained sounds, and the feeling of being watched when passing through the area. Some stories even claim this was a place where the boundary between the human world and supernatural forces was so thin it could be breached. Jamie found an old article from the 1980s that described a series of disappearances in the area. The victims were all young people who vanished at night without leaving a trace. The police conducted investigations but found no evidence. A single witness, an elderly man, had claimed to see a tall, distorted figure standing in the middle of the grounds late one night. However, his testimony was dismissed as fanciful and not taken seriously. Jamie dug even deeper and found a research document discussing supernatural phenomena in the area. The document mentioned the concept of a thin boundary, a state where the human world and the world of supernatural entities could intersect. This land, according to the document, was one of the rare points of intersection in the world. People living nearby often spoke of feeling drawn into another space where time and reality lost their meaning. Jamie felt a rising fear. They began to understand that this Walmart wasn't just an ordinary workplace. It was built on dangerous land, where the strange rules weren't a joke but were meant to protect people from things they couldn't comprehend. Jamie recalled Mickey's warning. Don't ask too many questions. Don't break the rules. But now, they couldn't stop. They needed to know what was truly happening in this place. They decided they would continue investigating, even though they knew every step deeper could bring them closer to something they didn't want to face. But Jamie also knew that if they didn't, they would forever live in uncertainty and fear. And the most terrifying thing wasn't the supernatural entities, it was the truth they might uncover. The fourth night at Walmart began with a heavier feeling than usual. Jamie couldn't shake the images and information they had found about the Hollow Grounds from their mind. It felt as though every step they took was being watched, every pale white light in the store hiding some kind of secret. But tonight, the strangeness didn't just stop at shadows, or eerie sounds that appeared clearly, right before their eyes. Around 2 a.m., while Jamie was checking the garden section where potted plants and gardening tools were displayed, they noticed something strange. The potted plants, which were usually arranged randomly, were now forming a perfect circle. It wasn't a random or messy arrangement, but a circle so precise it made Jamie's skin crawl. The pots were spaced evenly apart, and each one was oriented in a specific direction, as if someone had deliberately arranged them this way. Jamie stood still, staring at the circle. They didn't know why, but a strange feeling crept into their chests as if this circle wasn't just an ordinary arrangement. They felt a sudden cold breeze sweep through the area, making their skin prickle with goosebumps. The air grew heavy, and Jamie had the distinct sense that they were standing before something dangerous and beyond human understanding. At that moment, Leonard, the store manager, appeared. He didn't look like the Leonard Jamie was used to seeing. Instead of his usual relaxed demeanor and tired eyes, Leonard looked serious and tense. He didn't say a word, just walked toward the circle of potted plants and began doing something strange. Leonard knelt down, pulled an object from his Pokita vintage clock with a cracked glass face and placed it in the center of the circle. Then, he muttered words that Jamie couldn't understand, as if performing some kind of ritual. Jamie stood a few meters away, too afraid to approach. They could feel, deep down, that they shouldn't interfere, but their eyes couldn't look away from Leonard and the circle. As Leonard continued, Jamie noticed a change in the atmosphere. The circle of potted plants began to emit a faint glow, not a normal light, but a cold, grayish-blue light, as if it were opening a door. Leonard stopped, turned to Jamie, and said in a low, grave voice, "You shouldn't be here." But Jamie couldn't move. They just stood there, watching Leonard continue the ritual. After a few minutes, the light from the circle of potted plants disappeared, and the air in the area returned to normal. Leonard collected the clock, adjusted the pots back to their original positions, and left everything as if nothing had happened. Before leaving, Leonard looked at Jamie and said, his voice full of warning, "These circles aren't something to mess with. They're gateways. If they're not reset properly, they'll open and what's on the other side will come through. You don't want to know what that is." Jamie felt as though the blood in their veins had frozen. They didn't ask any more questions, just nodded and turned away, but their mind was flooded with questions. What were these circles? What was the other world Leonard mentioned? And more importantly, what would happen if they accidentally broke the rules? That night, Jamie couldn't sleep. They realized that this Walmart wasn't just a workplace, it was a gateway to dark and dangerous secrets they couldn't comprehend. But the more frightened they became, the more they felt compelled to uncover the truth. They knew they had stepped into a game with no way out, and every night at the store would bring them closer to something they couldn't even begin to imagine. Jamie couldn't stop thinking about what had happened with the circle of potted plants and Leonard's warning. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare, where everything familiar was distorted by a reality he couldn't comprehend. But the more he feared, the more his curiosity grew. He needed answers, and the only person who could help him now was Mickey, the store's longtime employee, who always seemed to know more than he was willing to share. During his break, Jamie sat down next to Mickey in the break room. He looked at him, his eyes filled with worry and determination. "Mickey, I need to know the truth. This store, it's not normal. Leonard talked about gateways, about another world, and those rules, they're not just for keeping order, are they?" Mickey sighed, his eyes reflecting a deep exhaustion. He set his coffee cup down on the table, staring at Jamie for a long moment before speaking, his voice low and serious. "You're right. This store isn't normal. It was built on something we call the threshold, a fragile boundary between our world and another world." Jamie felt a chill run down his spine. "Another world? What do you mean?" Mickey nodded, his gaze becoming distant, as if recalling something from the past. "That world isn't like anything you can imagine. It's not a place meant for humans. The entities there, they're not like us. They don't have fixed forms. They don't feel emotions like humans do. They have only one purpose: to invade. And if they manage to cross this threshold, everything will change. Not just the store, but our entire world." Jamie froze, trying to process Mickey's words. "So, the rules? They're to stop those entities?" Mickey nodded again, his expression graver than ever. "Exactly. The rules aren't a joke. They're the only way to keep this threshold stable, to prevent that other world from spilling into ours. Every rule has a reason. If you break them, even just once, you'll create a crack, and believe me, you don't want to know what will come through that crack." Jamie's heart began to race. He recalled all the rules he had been given. Don't look at the screen after 2 a.m. Don't enter the garden section without a reason. Don't answer any calls from unknown numbers. These rules, which he had once thought were strange and nonsensical, now seemed more terrifying than ever. They weren't ordinary regulations. They were shields protecting him from something he couldn't understand. Jamie looked at Mickey, his voice trembling. So, if one day we don't follow the rules, what happens? Mickey stared at Jamie for a long time before answering, his voice low but full of warning. If that happens, you won't be here to ask me anymore. And this store, it won't be a store anymore. It will become an open door, letting everything from the other side flood in. And when that happens, no one can save us. Jamie felt like his entire world had just been turned upside down. He didn't know what to do with this information, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just an ordinary employee. He was working in a place where every action he took could determine life or death, not just for himself, but for the entire world. But what terrified Jamie the most wasn't the supernatural entities, it was the fact that he had stepped into a game he couldn't escape, and this game, he knew, would only grow more dangerous with time. Thursday night at the Walmart store began with an eerie silence. Jamie started his shift, a chilling sensation enveloping him as soon as the automatic doors closed behind him. The air inside the store felt thick, heavier than usual, as though it was hiding some dark secret. Jamie was accustomed to odd occurrences, but tonight, everything seemed far beyond anything he had ever experienced. While checking the toy section, Jamie felt something was off. Everything was silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a terrifying one, as if all sound had been sucked away by something invisible. Jamie stopped, looked around, and then he saw it. A child. But not an ordinary child, it was a strange entity. It stood in the middle of the aisle, dressed in an old white outfit. But what froze Jamie wasn't its clothes, it was its face. The child had no face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a pale, blank void, as if its face had been erased. Jamie felt his heart pounding. He wanted to run, but his legs seemed frozen in place. The child didn't move, just stood there, but its presence made the air around it grow colder. Jamie tried to breathe, but every exhale felt like he was being suffocated by fear. Suddenly, the child turned its head not in a natural way, but with a jerking motion, as if pulled by an invisible force. And then it vanished, dissolving into the darkness as if it had never been there. Jamie barely had time to recover when another movement caught his attention. From the corner of the home goods section, a shadow began to shift. But this wasn't an ordinary shadow. It wasn't a reflection of someone. It was a living entity. The shadow crawled, slithered across the floor, as if searching for something. Jamie stepped back, trying to keep his distance, but the shadow seemed to sense his presence. It stopped, then slowly advanced toward him, each movement carrying an icy chill that pierced to the bone. Jamie was about to scream when a hand rested on his shoulder. He turned sharply, startled, and saw Leonard standing there, his face more serious than Jamie had ever seen. "You'll need this," Leonard said, handing Jamie a small bag. Inside were salt, a small iron rod, and a pouch of herbs. "This is a protection kit. The entities you're seeing aren't something you can deal with in a normal way. They're not human. They're things from the other side." Jamie took the bag, his hands trembling. "Will these protect me?" Leonard nodded, but his eyes betrayed his worry. "They'll help you keep them at a distance. But remember, you can't let them get close. Once they touch you, nothing will be able to save you." Jamie glanced back at the area where the shadow had appeared, but it was gone. However, he knew it was still somewhere, lurking in the dark corners of the store. He gripped the protection kit tightly, feeling as though he was stepping into a battle he wasn't prepared for. But now, he had no other choice. The entities had appeared, and he had to face them whether he wanted to or not. That night, Jamie realized that Walmart was not just a workplace, it was a battlefield where the boundary between two worlds was being tested every day. And he, an ordinary employee, had unwittingly become the guardian of that fragile boundary. But would he have the strength to stand against the dangerous entities that were drawing ever closer? He didn't know. The only thing he knew was that he couldn't turn back. The game had begun, and he had to keep going no matter the outcome. Halloween night descended, bringing with it a deathly silence that engulfed the Walmart store. The air was heavy and cold, so much so that Jamie felt as though every breath he took was freezing. The store was already strange, but tonight, everything felt different. The neon lights flickered erratically, the long aisles now seemed to stretch endlessly, and an uneasy feeling crept into every corner. Jamie knew this wasn't an ordinary night. This was the time when the boundary between two worlds was at its weakest. Leonard summoned all the Blue Star employees' secret group responsible for protecting the store from things customers were never meant to know about. Jamie stood in the circle, feeling like he was part of a strange ritual rather than a meeting. Leonard, with a serious expression, held a map of the store in his hands. "Tonight," he began, his voice deep and heavy, "the boundary will be at its weakest. Entities from the other side will try to break through. We must protect key areas, especially the main entrance and the storage section." Jamie swallowed nervously, looking at his colleagues. They were all seasoned individuals, their eyes cold but filled with determination. Jamie felt like an outsider, a newcomer unprepared for what the night would bring. Leonard continued, assigning tasks to each person. Jamie was tasked with guarding the home goods section, a place he knew had been the site of strange occurrences in the past. "Remember," Leonard warned, "no matter what happens, don't break the rules. Don't leave your position. Don't interact with anyone who isn't part of the group. And under no circumstances should you let your gaze linger too long on anything that doesn't seem right." Jamie gripped the protection kit, tightly salt, iron, and herbs as he stepped into the home goods section. The cold here was worse than anywhere else. Large mirrors lined the aisles, reflecting his image. But Jamie noticed that sometimes the reflection didn't quite match his movements. He tried not to look at them, but every time his eyes glanced over, he felt as though something on the other side was watching him. The clock struck 11:45 p.m., and Jamie began to hear strange noises. Footsteps echoed, but when he turned around, there was no one there. Whispering sounds grew faint, as if they were moving around him, but there was no clear source. Jamie's heart raced, cold sweat running down his back. He remembered Leonard's words, "Don't let them get close." Suddenly, a loud noise came from the end of the aisle. Jamie spun around and saw a dark shadow crawling along the floor. It had no defined shape, just a mass of darkness, but Jamie could feel the dangerous energy emanating from it. He quickly poured salt on the floor, creating a protective circle around himself. The shadow stopped, as though it was blocked by the invisible barrier the salt had created. It growled, emitting sounds unlike anything Jamie had ever heard from any living creature. When the clock struck midnight, everything erupted. Entities from the other world began appearing all over the store. Screams echoed from other sections, but Jamie couldn't leave his position. He saw shadows darting back and forth, vague shapes appearing in the mirrors, and an invisible pressure weighing heavily on his chest. All he could do was grip the iron rod tightly, praying that the boundary would hold. At 12:30 a.m., everything suddenly stopped. The air became lighter, and the entities disappeared as if they had never been there. Jamie collapsed onto the floor, his breathing labored. Leonard entered the section, his eyes weary but relieved. "You did well," he said, patting Jamie on the shoulder. "But this is just the beginning. "You'll have to get used to this." Jamie didn't respond. He looked around the store, now quiet again, but he knew this calm was only temporary. Halloween night had passed, but the boundary remained fragile, and the entities were always waiting for another chance to break through. He was no longer just an ordinary Walmart employee. He was a guardian, and his responsibility had only just begun. The final night at Walmart began like an unending nightmare. Jamie stepped into his shift, feeling an overwhelming cold and isolation envelop him from the very first moment. The store was shrouded in an unusual darkness. Although the neon lights were still on, the light seemed incapable of dispelling the creeping eeriness that permeated the space. Jamie could sense clearly that tonight was unlike any other. Something bigger, more dangerous, was waiting. At 2 a.m., the first sound echoed, a deep noise, as if the earth itself was groaning. Jamie stood in the home goods section, staring at the floor. In the center of the aisle, the ground began to crack, small fissures spreading like wounds opening. From within the cracks, a thick, viscous darkness spilled out, spreading across the floor like a living liquid. Jamie stepped back, his heart pounding as he watched a massive black hole begin to form. And then, the entity appeared. From within the black hole, a giant creature emerged, its form unlike anything Jamie had ever seen. It had no defined shape, just a massive shadow, constantly shifting and transforming as if it didn't belong to this world. But what terrified Jamie the most were the faces. Dozens, hundreds of human faces appeared on the surface of the entity, twisted and agonized, as if they were trying to escape but were trapped forever. Jamie recognized some of the face employees who had gone missing before, people Leonard had mentioned. They were no longer themselves but had become part of this monstrous being. The entity let out a deafening roar that reverberated throughout the store, shaking everything around it. Jamie felt his legs freeze in place, but he knew he couldn't stand still. He quickly grabbed his protection kit salt, iron, and herb sand began to act. He scattered salt on the floor, creating a circle around himself, then used the iron rod to draw a symbol Leonard had taught him. The entity paused, seemingly halted by the boundary Jamie had created. But it didn't last long. The massive creature began to change. The faces on its surface screamed, and from the darkness, long, spindly arms emerged, reaching toward Jamie. He tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. One arm touched the protective boundary, and instantly, the salt circle began to dissolve. Jamie felt an invisible pressure bearing down on him, as if the creature was draining his strength. He didn't give up. Jamie gripped the iron rod tightly, charging at the entity and striking at the arms reaching for him. Each time the rod connected with the darkness, the creature let out a pain screech, but it didn't stop. The arms kept appearing, more and stronger, until one larger than all the rest reached out and grabbed Jamie. He screamed, struggling to break free, but the creature's power was overwhelming. Jamie felt his body being pulled toward the black hole, where the darkness waited to consume him. In his final moments, he saw Leonard from a distance, his eyes filled with pain but helplessness. Jamie understood that no one could save him. He had gone too far, and now he had to face his fate. As Jamie's body was completely pulled into the black hole, everything around him fell silent. The entity vanished, the black hole closed, and the store returned to its quiet state as if nothing had happened. But Jamie knew he wasn't dead. He still existed, but not in this world. He had become part of the entity, a new face on its surface, forever trapped in endless darkness. The Walmart store now looked normal, but those who remained knew the entity was still out there, waiting to reappear. And Jamie, no longer himself, was still there, watching from the other side, a haunting reminder that the boundary between the two worlds was never truly safe. Jamie woke up, but not in the world he once knew. Everything around him was distorted, bizarre, and completely unfamiliar. The air was so cold it felt like needles pricking his skin. The ground beneath him wasn't soil or flooring, but a strange material both soft and solid, as if it were alive. The light in this place didn't come from the sun or electric bulbs, but from a faint blue glow emitted by entities floating in the air. Jamie felt as though he had been thrown into a nightmare, a place where all the rules of the world he once knew had been broken. He stood up, his legs trembling but his resolve firm. Around him, supernatural entities appeared, vague and menacing. They had no fixed forms. Sometimes they were elongated shadows. Other times they morphed into distorted, agonized faces. Jamie recognized a few familiar faces, people who had gone missing at the Walmart store. They didn't scream or plead for help, but their eyes were filled with despair, as if they were trapped here forever. Jamie couldn't let this continue. He remembered Leonard's words, "No matter what happens, follow the rules." But now, he was no longer someone who simply followed orders. He decided to break every limit to find a way back to his world and bring back the missing people. Jamie knew this wasn't just a fight to save himself, but a battle to free the souls that had been imprisoned. He began to move, one step at a time, searching for an escape. The otherworldly realm had no clear paths, only a series of interwoven, strange, and infinite spaces. Every step Jamie took was watched by the entities around him. They didn't attack, but their presence made him feel as though he was being suffocated by fear. Jamie tried to stay calm, recalling the rules Leonard had taught him. Don't look directly at them. Don't let them touch you. And don't let fear take control. Finally, Jamie saw a different light in the distance. It wasn't the faint blue glow of this world, but a warm, white light, as though it belonged to the old world. Jamie ran toward the light, but the entities began to move. They lunged at him, their long, spindly arms reaching out, trying to pull him back. Jamie used all his strength to run, not looking back, not stopping, and not letting fear slow him down. When he reached the light, a door appeared. This door was unlike any Jamie had ever seen it. Had no hinges, no handle, just a glowing void. Jamie turned to look at the entities closing in on him. He knew he couldn't save everyone, but he decided he would come back. "I'll find a way," he whispered before stepping through the door. Jamie woke up in the Walmart store, lying on the cold floor of the home goods section. The clock read 3 a.m., and the store was as quiet as ever. But Jamie knew that nothing was over. He could feel a change in the air, a presence that ordinary people couldn't sense. Jamie stood up, his eyes filled with determination. He knew the otherworldly realm still existed, and the entities were still waiting. But he also knew he wouldn't stop. He would find a way back, bring the missing people with him, and break this horrific cycle. Before leaving the store, Jamie left a warning for the night shift workers. Always follow the rules. And if you see something wrong, don't look, don't touch, and don't ask. There are things you never want to know.